Now we have our 4 granny squares that we need to connect together, and I'm just going to show you a few different ways that you can connect them. Before we get here, you definitely want to make sure that all of your edges have the same number of stitches on them. You can fudge that if they don't, but to begin, it's better if they are all the same number of stitches, just so you don't have to remember where you need to add a stitch or anything like that. The second thing you need to know is that when you are seaming together with a needle, there are other ways that I'm going to show you that you can seam these together with your hook, but if you're seaming them with your needle, you definitely need to use a color that is one of the colors on the outside edge. You're going to be able to see it a little bit because we are going to go into this color that is different, but it's okay. You want, as long as it matches one of the two, so I could have used this green color or the gray. I'm going to use the gray. That's perfectly fine. Just make sure it's one of the two colors and cut off a good piece of that yarn. So I have a good little wad here that I've cut off to use with the seaming. So the first way we're going to do it is with another whip stitch, which we did with our wrist warmer. So thread your needle, and then we're going to take 2 of the squares, and you're going to put the squares backside to backside so they line up like that. And what we're going to do is we're going to go through the back loop of each V when we do our stitches. So we're going to go through the back loops of each V to do our stitches. If you have a 3-stitch corner, I like to start in the middle stitch just because that is the finishing edge. So find the middle stitch of each corner and go through the back loop of those. And then you kind of have to pull a lot of yarn through the first few times that you're doing this. Just make sure you don't get it knotted up. And you're going to have to kind of work with it as you go to make sure that doesn't happen. And mine probably is going to get knotted while I go. So you're going to kind of pull that through and leave a good like 5 inches at the end just so you have that to tie in later. And then we're going to do that figure 8 connection just to make sure our ends are connected and secure at this meeting point here. So we've gone through and done that, and I'm going to go back through. So now I know this end is secure right here. So now I'm just going to go through the back loop of each stitch all the way across. And just kind of pull that end out of the way as you go. And you don't want to pull it too tight because you want to make sure it looks good on the front. I think this one takes a long time because you have to cut the yarn and you have to keep pulling it through. But this is what it looks like when it is finished. So as you can see when you're doing the whip stitch, it just creates these little stitches that you can see the colors. And it's a really nice stitch to use. I'm going to go ahead and connect all of this row and I'll meet you at the corner so you can see how we add the other 2 blocks to it. So here we are at the last couple of stitches on our granny square edge. And I've gone through the last of the 3 clusters here. So we're going to do the first of the corner stitches And this is kind of where it gets a little confusing. And I think everybody does this differently, but this is the way I like to do it. I like to make a little X at the corner. So I like to take this stitch of this corner and then the middle stitch of this corner, and then I save these two middle stitches for when we do this way. So we're done with that. Now we're going to take the second or the third chain from this corner to the third chain on this corner. And that's just kind of how I do my corners. Like I said, other people do them other ways, and if you find a way that works better for you, you can do that as well. And I just kind of pull that until my corners meet up. You don't want to pull it too tight, otherwise it could look weird. So, and then just go to the end of the row on these two squares. So basically you're going to do a whole row one way, and then you're going to do the other crossways. And that's how I usually connect all of my granny squares when I connect them with this method, which I rarely use. This is just one of the easier methods that everybody learns the first time that they're connecting granny squares. And I think all of the crocheters that I know hate connecting granny squares this way, just because it does take a while. You have to pull all your ends through, and you know, it's different from crocheting because you're whip stitching everything together. So I'm going to finish this row, and then I'm going to do the first half of this row right here, and then I'll meet you back in this center section here. So I've done all of my seaming up here, and now I'm at this corner area, so I'm going to turn it sideways so we can see a little bit better here. And I'm on this stitch in the chain. And so this is the stitch that we're going to cross over to this side, because it's the last. Let me zoom in here. So it's the last stitch of this square and the first stitch of this square. So we're just going to go across like that. And then pick up this last chain of this corner and the last chain of this corner. And then just kind of pull that until that corner looks, and just pull that until that corner tightens up a bit and looks really good. So, like I said, other people do their corners differently. That's just the way I prefer to do it, just because I like the way that looks, and it tends to be pretty easy to do. And there's not a big hole in the middle either because it crosses over. So we're just going to finish up this row by whip stitching across the rest of the stitches. When you get to these stitches that were the stitches we made to make the invisible join, make sure you go through the stitch but also through this top of the turning chain to anchor that stitch in. It's a really important thing if you do that invisible join. If you do the other join, you don't have to worry about picking up that bottom stitch down there. We're almost done. And we're just going to stop at the middle of the 3 chains, or if you're doing 2, you just do the first one and then you leave the second one. And then to finish it off, we would anchor it by doing the figure 8, but I'm not going to do that because I'm going to take this out and work with some other stitches. So that's kind of how it would look if you were doing a whole blanket. You would just keep, like I said, you would do each row. You don't want to cut your yarn long enough to do the whole row. You want to cut it like 2 arm lengths maybe, and then whenever you finish that, weave that in and then start the next arm length, just so your yarn isn't going to get really tangled up on you. But this is how it looks when you're connecting with the whip stitch with granny squares. So I'm going to take this out and show you a couple of more ways that you can do this.